It's often hard for men to open up and let out their emotions, which often leads to feeling lonely. And this issue is not as harmless as it may seem. It can lead to serious health and mental problems, and even early demise. In his research, British-American author and scholar Richard Reeves points out different factors that can make boys and men feel kinda excluded from society. They can even believe that various social systems like education or the workforce fail them. One of the reasons is struggling to live through a divorce or the end of a relationship, especially if a man can't find a new partner. Many men learn early in life to prioritize strength, stoicism, and independence, which makes it more difficult for them to form emotional connections. Lots of aging men feel lonely after losing a partner or friends. Here is just one example of how men don't make it due to loneliness and loss of hope. Let's call this man Brandon. He is a 49-year-old sales manager with some mental problems going through a recent separation from his wife. Brandon has an affair with a coworker and gets suspended by his employer. He experiences work stress because of deadlines and decides to reduce his medication without speaking about this issue with his doctor. He believes it will help him work more efficiently since his mood stabilizers and other medicines have a sedating effect. Sadly, instead of making him more productive, it leads to poor sleep, unrealistic work-related ideas, increasing arguments with his family, and other serious problems. Brandon's relatives contact mental health services, and it results in an involuntary mental health admission. Sometime later, Brandon lives in a short-term rental after being forced to leave his family home. His 2 adult children side with their mother, and Brandon feels totally unsupported. Even though his employer is quite forgiving since Brandon is one of the top-performing employees in the company, the man still gets an ultimatum. He has to see a psychiatrist and make up a return-to-work plan. Brandon is somewhat motivated by his kids who still try to keep in contact, albeit from a distance, so he agrees to attend regular group therapy. He is aware that he needs to take his medications regularly. But unfortunately, since he lives alone, there's nobody to control this process and, if needed, help to enforce it. Brandon's doctor advises him to take a month off work, then start working part-time, and gradually increase his workload over a few months. The specialist says Brandon needs to reach out to close friends. But the only reply the man gives is bitter laughter. Brandon doesn't have close friends. The friendships he used to have were through his wife, and those acquaintances have remained distant since their separation. As for work colleagues, despite his many years in the company, he hasn't made any real friends. Regardless of all these tragic circumstances, Brandon appears to be generally upbeat, even though he comes across as a lonely person. He still takes his medications, comes to group therapy sessions, and his return to work, initially awkward, seems to be quite successful. The plan is to attend part-time work for a few months, which is supposed to help him minimize stress. Brandon still lives alone but talks to his wife regularly and hopes for a reconciliation. He has a review appointment scheduled 2 months after the first one, but he misses it. Still, he sends an email with apologies, but doesn't provide any explanations, neither does he reschedule. 2 weeks after getting the email, his doctor gets tragic news. He finds out that Brandon decided to finish his life. These days, mental health services are working to engage lonely men with different strategies. Men don't tend to phone helplines when they're going through a crisis. Many don't want to start individual therapy, and men-only group therapy isn't always easy to find. Exercise, good sleep, and a healthy diet might help, but in most cases, they're not enough. More serious measures should be taken because lots of psychiatrists have cases similar to Brandon's. The age and mental issues may vary, but the main factor is often loneliness.
With more than 8 billion people in the world today, it's hard to imagine there was a time when there were so few human beings that they almost went extinct. It happened about 900,000 years ago when our ancient ancestors faced a crisis. Recent studies tell us there were only about 1,280 of them left, which is an incredibly small number. It's like just one village or a very, very small town left alone on the whole planet. The human race got into a population bottleneck where almost 98% of people disappeared, and things were tough for them for more than 100,000 years. We don't completely understand why this happened, but it was likely the result of tremendous changes in Earth's climate. It was a time when periods of cold weather lasted longer, the sea was colder, and there were more glaciers. Monsoons were immensely powerful, and yet there was less rain. These changes had an impact on wildlife species in Africa and Eurasia, and many plants and animals that were food sources for people disappeared. But at some point, our ancestors showed their strength and managed to bounce back despite tough times. The numbers started to go up again because people learned how to handle fire better. Plus, temperatures got warmer too. But what would the world look like if nature had defeated us and it all had really stopped for humanity back then? Let's take a trip to some parallel dimension where it really happened. In that universe, there wouldn't be empires, pyramids, and impressive achievements that some old civilizations left us. No neighborhoods, cities, your favorite park, or that bench where you like to sit and drink your coffee. No coffee. Ouch, that hurts. No pools, adventure parks, and no rush at the beaches. No creature would be able to go to another continent separated by the ocean. There would be no ships or planes that could carry it. Animals would have to wait for tectonic plates to move again to visit new territories. Wow, you've just realized how incredibly silent the world is. All because nature almost never produces as much noise as humans do. Our buildings are noisy, together with cars, motorcycles, and all other vehicles. If you live somewhere by the airport, you know how much noises planes can make too. And here, no one's phone's ringing. You don't hear music coming from bars or gyms. Wow, look how incredibly blue the sky is. You've never seen a sky like that in your world. The rain and wind scrub the surface of our planet clean, although there's not much work to be done since there's no dust and smog humans produce. I mean, there is dust, but a different kind, one that nature creates. We don't really notice it since we have so many heaters and air conditioning systems that blow air and all that dust around. The only drinking water you see is in lakes and rivers, and lots of different animals get together in these areas. It takes a while to get used to it. Wherever you go, there are wild animals passing by. There are no dogs, cats, or other pets you're used to. There's no electricity either. In case you've brought your phone, take pictures as fast as possible because you won't be able to charge your gadget when it runs out of battery. There's no internet though, so you'll be the only one who will see the photos. It's so weird to see grass so tall and wild. No one mows it, so it's hard to walk, especially considering there are no roads. And you don't have a scythe or any other tool that could help you clear your way, because human civilization hasn't reached that level of progress. Wow, there are plants you've never seen before. Every time a tree drops a seed, something new might grow. And there are no humans to select which plants they like and which they don't. You suddenly feel nostalgic, thinking of carrots, broccoli, potatoes, and all other vegetables people once started growing on their farms. You can hear tons of bugs buzzing around. We usually do everything to get rid of them, and now, without humans, you get to see how annoying they really are. Hey, the sun is going down. Without electric lights, all creatures just follow the rhythm of nature. So, if you're up for a late-night walk, wait for the moon and stars to lighten your path. But be aware of night predators. You may face creatures that didn't survive in the world where humans rule. Fire. Luckily, there's a river nearby, so you jump into the water to get to the other side. Fires happen more frequently in the world without humans. For instance, lightning can strike a tree or set a brush on fire. No one is there to put the flames out, so fires just keep spreading until at some point they burn themselves out. It's hard to see the world like this, but it's even harder to accept that Earth is fine without us. Just like it's doing well without dinosaurs, megalodons, woolly mammoths, dodos, and other ancient creatures that went extinct. Back to the research. Some scientists don't think our ancient ancestors were really that close to extinction. To get these results, researchers used FitCool, a special tool that helps study changes in ancient human populations by looking at the genetic information of modern people. They examined DNA from over 3,000 individuals in Africa and other places for this study. Some believe that the actual population numbers might have been bigger. The method used focuses on a small group of breeding individuals and may not exactly represent the whole population. There may be many archaeological sites in Eurasia and Africa that date back to the time when this population decline might have happened, so it may have affected just some groups of people in certain areas. Either way, not only wasn't it the end, but it was a new beginning. Two ancestral chromosomes combined to create a structure known as chromosome 2 in modern humans. This might have been the start of a new species, because there was a split between our ancestors and other ancient humans, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, our ancient cousins. Some evidence tells us this idea is plausible because our common ancestor lived about 500,000 to 700,000 years ago. Well, humans did survive all those devastating moments in history, but scientists believe that the extinction of our species is a matter of when, not if. Our fields will overgrow, cities will end up in ruins, and bridges will fail. Nature quickly reclaims the landscape where humans don't go. Check out how these roots and trees have taken over the temple in Cambodia. Roman ruins still defy time for over 1,500 years now. Some of the buildings and things we create in the modern world will do it too. Nature will break everything down at some point, and if humans were to go extinct, who would replace us? It took 200 million years for our kind to evolve from the first mammals. Who can repeat this entire process again? The last common ancestor of chimps and humans lived 8 million years ago. Knowing this, it seems possible that if Homo sapiens went extinct, a new species capable of using technologies would evolve from chimps. But hold on. There's something called the Fermi paradox. Even though there are hundreds of millions of rocky planets that could host life in our galaxy, we don't see any evidence of its existence. Our galaxy is 13.5 billion years old, so you can't say life hasn't had time to develop. One possible explanation is that certain crucial steps in the evolution of intelligent life are so rare they hardly ever happen. So, Earth would get along fine without us. The only ones who would care are us. And right now, we need to care a lot. Can you imagine that all modern humans came from about 1,000 people? Around 800,000 to 900,000 years ago, almost all of our ancestors disappeared, leaving about 1% of the population behind. So, what the heck happened? The Earth often goes through glacial cycles, things that we call ice ages. Back in the past, they were pretty mild and happened regularly, about every 41,000 years. The ice ages happen because of the Earth's axis. Our planet is slightly tilted at an angle, which is why its axis isn't straight up. Over thousands of years, this tilt has changed a bit. This teeny tiny shift completely changes how much sunlight we receive, especially at the poles, and leads to incredibly strong cold or warm periods. About 2.6 million years ago, when early humans were settling in on Earth, the Pleistocene epoch started. That's the era we traditionally call the Ice Age, the one from the movies. Large ice sheets completely covered parts of North America, Europe, and Asia. It wasn't constant ice everywhere all the time. These glacial cycles came and went, and sometimes ice sheets melted for a while. But overall, things were still much snowier and colder compared to now. We can still see the evidence of this from back in the day. Those glaciers carved out valleys and left behind some awesome things like moraines and fjords. And since sea levels were super low, a huge part of the world was land. This allowed people and animals to travel between continents and spread everywhere. It was the time of the megafauna. You all know about it from the movies. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and mastodons. Our ancestors had some fun times hunting all those giants. Now, humans didn't come from one lineage. It wasn't like monkeys slowly turned into humans. We also consisted of many species: Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and so on. But only one species, Homo sapiens, survived and turned into modern humans. Harsh conditions forced them to get smarter. They learned how to make tools, clothing, and shelters to survive. They became hunter-gatherers and invented fire, which turned out to be super useful during the Ice Age, you think? But they had no idea what horrible change was coming. Something disastrous happened about 800,000 to 900,000 years ago. Humans faced a drastic population crash. Only 1,280 people survived, give or take. Some 99% of early humans were wiped out, and this tiny 1% was lucky enough to become our ancestors. This almost extinction, unsurprisingly, was the climate's fault. It was the Middle Pleistocene transition. The Earth's orbit around the Sun changed its shape a bit. Carbon levels dropped. A lot of stuff was happening, and the Earth's climate was going wild, becoming incredibly cold and dry. The seas suddenly got chillier, and Africa and Eurasia experienced horrible droughts. Looking for food was almost impossible. Scientists learned this by taking the DNA of about 300,000 people from all around the world. They used a new method to help them map the history of human evolution over 1 million years and learn more about it. No wonder we can barely find any fossils from that time. There was almost no one around. What's interesting is that before that happened, most apes had 24 pairs of chromosomes. But because the population became so small, 2 sets got fused together, and we ended up with 23 pairs. This was the final straw that separated us from other apes. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all have 24 pairs, but our fused one became known as the human chromosome. Like a ripple effect, this little thing influenced our brain side, helped us start walking on our twos, and even form language. It took humans about 100,000 years to recover from this catastrophe. Only after all that time, they started spreading around again. Isn't that insane how we managed to go from 1,000 to 8 billion people? In any case, the Ice Age finally ended about 11,700 years ago. The warm period, called the Holocene, began. As things got warmer, human civilizations finally began to develop. 5,000 years ago, it was ancient Egypt, then the Indus Valley Civilization, ancient China, and others. And while we've been thriving for a while, there's one catch. The Middle Pleistocene transition changed the length and intensity of glacial cycles. Before the transition, sure, there was the Ice Age, but the cold was milder, and the glacial cycles were shorter. Things got covered in ice sheets about every 41,000 years. But after the transition, the glacial periods became longer and more severe. These cycles started following a new pattern. Although they happened every 100,000 years, they were super intense. Ice sheets grew large, even extending to the south. So from now on, ice ages that will continue to happen in the future will be a bit different. The next one should be at least 50,000 years from now, maybe longer. It's good for us because it'll occur later, but at the same time, the consequences will be stronger. What our ancestors went through is called a population bottleneck. That's what we call a sudden and huge reduction in the size of a population. Usually it happens because of things like earthquakes, floods or droughts, fires, and even human actions. Just a few people survive, and only they can pass their genes to future generations. And we've got plenty of such bottlenecks in history. Our modern species, Homo sapiens, originally lived in Africa. Around 60 to 80,000 years ago, a small group of them left Africa and spread across the world. It wasn't on a whim, though. They had to move somewhere because of the droughts and huge climate problems in Africa at that time. They had to go look for food and find new places to live. They traveled through the Middle East, moving into Europe and Asia, and eventually reaching Australasia and the Americas. They quickly settled across different continents and started mixing with local human-like species, like Denisovans and Neanderthals. But there was a problem. Originally, the African species were super genetically diverse, but since only a small part of them decided to move out, they carried just a bunch of these diverse genes with them. Unfortunately, this caused a bottleneck for everyone. Human-like species from other parts of the world became less genetically diverse. Since they had a smaller gene pool, they became more vulnerable to all the harmful stuff. The African population also had a drop in genetic diversity. But at least humans managed to survive. Although eventually, non-African populations really dropped, and there were no Neanderthals or Denisovans left, only us, Homo sapiens. That's why we can say that all modern humans came from Africa. Early humans sure had it rough. About 74,000 years ago, they went through yet another disaster, the Topo catastrophe. But keep in mind that all these things are just a hypothesis. It's not certain whether it actually happened. Now basically, scientists think that there might have been a supervolcanic eruption at Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. This volcano going crazy was an absolute catastrophe for Earth's climate and humans. The eruption was one of the most powerful volcanic events in the last 2 million years. It spewed out from 670 to 1,500 cubic miles of lava and volcanic stuff. Just so you know, there are about 3,100 cubic miles of water in our planet's entire atmosphere, and this eruption had almost half as much lava. This horrendous disaster led to the formation of Lake Toba, a massive caldera lake in Sumatra. It also spewed out tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This caused the so-called volcanic winter, which means that while it's not actually winter, the temperatures drop and the planet is freezing because all these ash clouds are blocking the sunlight from reaching the Earth. This event affected climate patterns for years to decades. This also most likely sped up the arrival of the next glacial cycle. Luckily, humans are crazy good at surviving. The global human population was reduced to a few thousand people yet again, and they still managed to overcome this.
What if 99% of humanity disappeared? First off, we're talking about a massive reduction in people, leaving only 80 million humans on the entire planet. But hey, don't panic just yet. Let's see how this wild ride would unfold. Imagine bustling cities turned into ghost towns, empty highways and quiet neighborhoods. It'd be like a never-ending vacation for those left behind. Of course, there'd be some challenges to tackle, like whoops, untended gas mains causing fires, and those abandoned chemical storage facilities and industrial plants might create some pollution. Oh, and let's not forget about abandoned nuclear power plants. Wild animals would be more free, and poor domestic cattle and sheep would struggle in cold northern climates. To make things worse, stored gasoline wouldn't last long because it's not so great at staying stable. Let's get to the silver lining. With only 80 million people, there would be plenty of resources. Organizing and salvaging whatever's left would be totally doable, especially in smaller countries like Belgium. They'd probably have a, "Hey, we got this" attitude. They'd have just around 120,000 folks left, all within a couple of hours' drive from each other. That is, of course, if this remaining 1% of the world's population is scattered around the planet equally based on countries' populations before this event happened. In this case, pretty much every nation would face a similar situation. Imagine South Korea with 500,000 people, mostly hanging out together. Brazil would have 2 million inhabitants chilling out along the Atlantic coast. Hopefully, unlike those movies where post-apocalyptic gangs go mad, the survivors would try to stick together in their old communities. These resourceful fellas would band together in new family and village communities, and they'd have the knowledge and skills to handle any troublemakers. Remember, we're social creatures, and we'd want to stick together to face the unknown. Well, at least we wouldn't have to start from scratch here. We'd have a major advantage. All the knowledge accumulated by humanity would still be with us. If we had electricity and internet available, we would be okay. So, would we re-industrialize? Yeah, we would. We'd have tools and machines still lying around, giving us a head start. Sure, renewable energy might be tricky at first, and we might have to rely on fossil fuels like coal, but we're resourceful, and we'd find a way to make it work. Plus, we'd have some brilliant minds with critical skills who'd step up to the challenge. This type of stuff kind of happened in real life. Think of the historical collapse events. They made an epic comeback that spanned centuries. Back in the 14th century, a plague struck and claimed the lives of up to half of all Europeans. The Middle East was also impacted, with around 1/10 of the global population succumbing to the disease. Surprisingly, this devastating event had little negative impact on Europe's technological and economic progress. And 2 centuries later, the population eventually rebounded to how it was before. 2 other instances of collapse are that of Rome and the Bronze Age. Both brought down impressive civilizations that had enjoyed technological advancements and economic prosperity and engaged in international trade. The Bronze Age collapse occurred between 1200 and 1150 BCE, leading to the fall of Mycenaean, Mycenaean Greece and Hittite civilizations, and the weakening of Egyptian and Assyrian civilizations. To this day, historians remain uncertain about the exact reasons behind this collapse. Rome, once boasting over 1 million inhabitants and serving as the seat of the Western Roman Empire for centuries, faced a dramatic decline in the 5th century. Within a few decades, the entire empire collapsed. It took until the 1930s for Rome to surpass its previous peak population. Fortunately, there are no historical examples of collapse events that resulted in more than 20% of the global population's demise. Many aspects of our physical infrastructure, such as machines, tools, and buildings, would still be intact and usable, placing us in a far better position than in 2500 BCE. The remaining 80 million survivors would have access to the wealth of knowledge accumulated by humanity. Moreover, some individuals might hold critical professions like engineers or chemists. It's quite likely that some people would have agricultural knowledge, helping feed the population. Okay, but let's make this scenario more personal. If you woke up one day to find 99% of the population missing, it would undoubtedly be an overwhelming and surreal experience. Survival would become your immediate priority, and your actions would largely depend on the resources and skills available to you. Here's what you would probably do. You'd take a moment to comprehend what's happened. This sudden disappearance of people would be shocking and confusing. Your friends and family would most probably be gone too, like it happened in Avengers. Your primary focus would be securing essential survival items, such as food, water, shelter, and medical supplies. You'd need to visit nearby grocery stores, pharmacies, and warehouses to gather provisions that could last for an extended period. Then you'd need to find other survivors. I mean, many people now lack essential skills like growing food, purifying water, or self-defense. You'd need to start learning them if there was no internet and no YouTube tutorials to rely on. Well, libraries, museums, and educational institutions have tons of information about the world and its history. Once you formed a community, you and your fellas would have to protect it like there's no tomorrow. You might feel like there isn't one at that point anyway. While most technology might still work initially, you'd need to ensure the protection of power sources. To do that, you'd have to be very cautious. The world would be in turmoil, so you'd need to remain vigilant and cautious of potential dangers. Without proper law enforcement and governance, there could be risks from wild animals, natural disasters, or even other survivors who might be hostile. Now let's explore the best and worst case scenarios. The sudden disappearance of so many people would create widespread chaos, leading to mass accidents and damage. With the absence of healthcare professionals and medical supplies, diseases could spread, leading to health crises. Food production and distribution systems would collapse, and food shortages and famine could become a real possibility. Looting and violence could occur since desperate people would search for resources and try to survive. The best case scenario is that after all this chaos, survivors would eventually come together to support one another and form resilient communities. The world would have significantly fewer carbon emissions, leading to a positive impact on the environment. With a small population, resources like food and water might be more abundant and sustainable in the long run. Without the constraints of a highly populated world, people could focus on individual passions, arts, and creativity. With advanced technology still available, survivors might start working on preserving knowledge and advancing scientific research. But overall, the world would change drastically, and the future would be uncertain. Your actions and the actions of other survivors would play a crucial role in shaping the new world and determining its trajectory. Feeling like a fishing pro? Head to the nearest water body and try your luck at reeling in some aquatic treats. Now, here's an idea. Become a green thumb superstar. Plant those seeds, nurture your crops, and watch your mini farm flourish. Farm-to-table cuisine, anyone? And how about those furry friends? If you spot any wandering pets, befriend them, and you've got yourself some loyal companions. Now take a deep breath, chin up, and embrace your inner survival guru. Remember, this might be a wild ride, but you've got the spirit and the skills to thrive in this post-apocalyptic feast of life. So go out there.
Well, here's some facts you'll find hard to digest. Your stomach has a pretty incredible capacity, being able to hold up to half a gallon of liquids. That's a whole large bottle of Coke. It's pretty hard to estimate how much hard food you can eat because it's processed with your teeth before it gets to your stomach. There's definitely not enough room for a turkey, but a good-sized chicken would probably fit in it. If you were asked where your stomach was, you would probably point to your tummy. Sorry, that's wrong. It's actually up here, hidden in between your ribs. Scientists believe that the appendix will disappear eventually. Nobody really knows why we need it, but some researchers claim it might have existed to help our ancestors digest tree bark. Because it's no longer part of our daily diet, the appendix isn't necessary and can disappear from our bodies without any consequences. The appendix isn't the only obsolete part of our body. Wisdom teeth aren't that useful either. Yeah, they used to come in handy whenever our ancestors lost some of their teeth, but the only thing they help us lose now is the money we spend extracting them. Almost all of our body is covered with hairs, even if we don't notice them. They grow even in the belly button. Their purpose is to catch lint. Check it out. See? Your liver acts as your own personal bodyguard, protecting you from toxins and many other things you don't want hanging around in your body. It's also pretty indestructible and can even regenerate. Only about 43% of you is actually you. Over 50% of the cells in your body belong to tiny little creatures that mainly live in your gut. Still, even though your own cells are fewer than microbial ones, there are, on average, about 100 trillion of them in you. See, you're not alone. With this in mind, your own genes are less than half of what you really consist of. If you take all the microbes dwelling within your body and count their genes, you'll find between 2 to 20 million. If you sleep, it doesn't mean all of your body sleeps. In fact, sometimes your brain has to work even harder when you're asleep. It needs to process tons of information, and reports usually take a lot of time. The nose definitely gets a good rest while you're sleeping. Amazingly, your sense of smell basically deactivates at night. You wouldn't even be bothered if there was a really terrible smell in your bedroom. No comment. The nose is probably one of the most underappreciated parts of the body. We wouldn't even be able to enjoy eating without it. About 80% of the taste of any food is thanks to the nose and its ability to recognize odors. If you hold your nose while eating, you will taste almost nothing. With no sense of smell, you're likely to recognize food mostly by texture. So an onion might seem no different than a big refreshing apple. Scientists used to believe we could distinguish about 10,000 smells, but they were wrong. Recent research showed that people are actually able to distinguish between more than 1 trillion smells. We also remember them better than anything else, and smells can even evoke some distant memories. Your nose just doesn't help you breathe and catch odors, it filters the air for sensitive throats and lungs. If we inhale dry air, the nose moistens it, cools it, and heats it if it's necessary. Also, the nose cleans the air of dirt. When you age, your brain is gradually reducing in size. By age 75, it's much smaller than at 30, and it starts shrinking by the age of 40. It happens to everyone and doesn't affect your mental strength in any way. Our brain can store only 7 bits in its short-term memory. Don't even try to compare your brain with a phone capacity, not even the one you had back in 2005. That's why you can't even learn a phone number by heart. Our short-term memory functions just like a chalkboard. You can get some information, but sooner or later, you run out of space. To check your working memory capacity, try this test. Ask a friend to write a list of 10 words and read it to you. Most people recall 7 or fewer items from that list. Your RAM, or working memory, is an essential thing that we need to perform almost any everyday activity, including basic conversations, surfing the net, and even petting your dog. Our strongest and emotional memories are often fake. The central memory gives us the confidence to believe that we remember everything, even though most of the details are made up in our heads. Not only your brain shrinks as you get older, you too shrink dramatically. The bones get more brittle, the backbone gets compressed. A similar thing happens when you rest at night. Your bones kind of relax too. Because of this, you wake up taller in the mornings than you are at the end of the day. Among mammals, only humans can walk on two legs for their entire lives. You might think that kangaroos or gorillas move in the same way, but kangaroos use their tail as a third leg, and gorillas use their long arms to keep balance. Your bones take part in metabolism too. Since they mostly consist of calcium, when there's not enough of this element in your blood, bones start shedding it into the bloodstream, balancing your body. The same reaction works in reverse too. When there's too much calcium in your blood, it goes into the bones to be stored for later. The only bone to have a sense of humor in your body is inside your upper arm. That's why it's called the humerus. Okay, I made that one up. Moving along. The only bones that never grow are found in our ears. We can hear thanks to these tiny bones because they have adapted to transmit sound vibrations. Doctors call them the oscular chain. One of these hearing bones, the stapes, is the smallest bone in your entire body. It's no larger than a grain of rice. Our height, shape of our body, and skin color depend a lot on where our ancestors used to live, but we can adapt to new conditions even within our own lifespan. For example, if you move from plains to the mountains, you'll eventually develop more red blood cells to compensate for the lack of oxygen. And naturally, if you move from a colder climate to a hotter and sunnier one, your skin will get darker to adapt. Our lifespan is programmed within our cells. They constantly renew and divide, but they have a sort of internal timer that stops at some point. Some cells also stop reproducing sooner than others. On average, cells cease dividing when we reach the age of 100. That means if we could find a way to trick ourselves into turning off the timer, we could potentially live forever. Body fat isn't just a nuisance. It acts as insulation material, energy reserve, and shock absorber. Your body sends the most fat into your waist region because that's where your internal organs are. If something happens to you, this layer of fat might protect your vitals from irreparable damage. Heads up! Your skull isn't a single bone. It actually consists of 28 different bones, many of which are fused together to protect your brain. The mandible, or the lower jaw, is the only skull bone that isn't fixed to the bone around it. It's attached with connective tissues and muscles. This is what makes it so mobile. You can move it in any direction you like. You see, the strongest muscles in your body aren't in your arms or legs. They're in your head. The masseter is the main muscle responsible for chewing, and it needs to be the strongest for you to eat normally. And you know those muscles that allow you to move your ears? Those are temporalis, located above your temples. They also help you chew your food. Now, we've got two really fast muscles. They control the eyelid closing. In fact, they're the fastest muscles in our body. Eyes are fragile and need protection, so the reflex that protects them needs to be as fast as lightning. These muscles can shut the eyelids in less than a tenth of a second. People with double-jointed thumbs can bend them backward. It looks super unusual and very few people can do it. Still, it's totally okay. Even though it looks painful, it actually doesn't hurt at all for someone with a double-jointed thumb. Now, we recognize only purple-blue, green-yellow, and yellow-red colors. Everything else is a combination of these three. It's impossible to calculate how many of these combinations the human eye sees, because every single person has slight vision differences. But it's about 1 million combinations on average. You see? Oh, you love yourself more than anyone else. You have no doubts about your beauty. You're sure that you are prettier, smarter, and more charming than others. You're the best. The only person you look at with adoration is you in the mirror. So congrats, you probably have narcissism. The word that describes this unusual mental condition appeared in ancient times. According to Greek mythology, the name Narcissus belonged to some fascinating character. His story can teach you that too much self-love can cause too many problems. There are reasons why people behave narcissistically, but before we know them, let's take a look at the myth. So, there are several versions of Narcissus' stories. He was the son of two mythological creatures. When he was born, a fortune teller told his parents, Your son will stay alive until he sees himself. So, smartly, they removed all mirrors and reflective objects from the house. Narcissus was a handsome young man. Everyone admired his beauty. Local nymphs and girls were in love with him. But Narcissus didn't like anyone. He liked to walk in the forest, eat fruit, and listen to birds singing. And then, one day, a nymph named Echo saw him walking amongst flowers and trees. She fell in love with him right at that second. After a while, she told him about her feelings, but Narcissus rejected her. It broke Echo's heart. She ran away and hid in the depths of the forest. She couldn't drink and eat because of such sadness, so she passed away. The only thing that remained after her was her voice. It echoed through the trees and bushes. And then someone named Nemesis heard it. She was outraged that Narcissus had rejected the nymph. She decided to punish him, so Nemesis made him fall in love with himself. Wow, Nemesis, Narcissus, this could get confusing. Anyway, one day Narcissus saw his reflection in the pond and couldn't take his eyes off. He looked at himself in love for many weeks until life left him since he didn't drink and eat anything all this time. Oops. Narcissus disappeared but left behind a beautiful flower near the pond. They called this flower after his name. Well, I guess that's better than being called Potsy. Now, in another version, Hera punished the nymph Echo for one misconduct related to Zeus. Hey, you gotta be up on your Greek gods and stuff. Hera made it impossible for her to speak normally, so from that moment, she could only repeat what she heard. If you had asked her, "Hey, is it a bird or a dinosaur?" she would have answered, "Hey, is it a bird or a dinosaur?" Yeah, that could get annoying. Echo didn't want to live with such a curse, so she hid in a dark cave. She decided to live there till the end of her days. A little time had passed, and then she noted Narcissus walking by. Well, the nymph immediately found a new meaning in life as she fell in love with the young man. But how to confess your feelings? She couldn't talk to him normally. Therefore, Echo decided to ask the forest for help. She had some magic abilities that allowed her to control animals and trees. She used birds and leaves of trees to somehow share her feelings with Narcissus. The young man immediately realized the nymph was in love with him. But he did say no without hesitation. He was too interested in himself and didn't want to share such a person with someone else. Or maybe he liked nobody at all. Perhaps he was looking for his ideal of beauty that didn't exist in nature. The already unhappy Echo became even sadder. She returned to her cave and began to cry. She couldn't eat and drink. She decided that she would stay here forever. In the last days, Echo asked Nemesis to restore justice and punish Narcissus for his arrogance. Nemesis deprived him of the opportunity to love someone else and forced him to love only himself. And then, one hot day, Narcissus went to the pond to cool down a little. He bent on his knees to drink some water and saw the reflection. At that moment, the prophetess's words came true. Narcissus was so amazed by his beauty that he couldn't take his eyes off the pond surface. He got so caught up, he kept himself from eating or drinking. The water was in front of him, but he didn't quench his thirst because the beauty wasn't letting him go. Wow, there's a whole lot of starving going on over somebody's good looks. Anyway, Narcissus bent down so low that he fell into the water and never surfaced again. The nymphs of the forest couldn't find him. Many women grieved. A beautiful flower with white petals appeared on the river shore. They named it after the handsome young man. While the nymphs mourned him on earth, Narcissus was in the underworld, and even there he couldn't stop admiring himself. Narcissus was doomed to look at his reflection in the river Styx for an eternity. It was like a daze. This self-love hypnotized him. The eternal gaze in his reflection made him infinitely unhappy and happy at the same time. Such a character causes no sympathy, since people don't like narcissistic personalities. But another version of the famous legend justifies the young man's actions. A famous Greek traveler and geographer wrote in one of his books, Description of Greece, Narcissus had a beautiful twin sister. They looked like 2 drops of water. And one terrible day, she passed away. Grief broke Narcissus's heart, but then he saw his reflection and couldn't take his eyes off it. But not because he fell in love with himself, but because his face reminded him of his sister. He looked at himself because he didn't want to part with her again. Yeah, this story seems sadder, but in any case, these are all myths that give us an accurate description of a specific type of person's personality. All narcissists always think about their success, splendor, beauty, and some perfect love with ideal persons. They're sure they're unique and better than other people. They want to communicate only with those with the same high level of uniqueness. Narcissists live in a fantasy world about their greatness. There's nothing wrong if people love themselves, but sometimes this love becomes too strong. It's challenging to have a relationship with narcissists because they concentrate only on themselves and don't have empathy. They can't read other people's feelings. You're crying after watching a sad movie, but a narcissist is ill-equipped for understanding your emotions. But with all these negative qualities, narcissists are very charming people. It's always fun with them, and they know how to make you laugh and get your attention. If a person loves himself, then he becomes attractive to others. Do you want to jump with a parachute? No problem. Hey, it's a bigger problem if you jump without one. How about you fly to another country right now? Sure, why not? It's all cool. But then you realize that it's challenging to be friends with this person because you can't share joy, sadness, and other feelings. Now, don't think that narcissists have complex character because they're not good people and they like it. Such a personality grows over the years, but it all starts at an early age. Imagine that your parents praise you from the day of your birth only for your achievements and appearance. Did you win the swimming competition? Great! Have you passed the exam? Perfect! You're so handsome, your parents tell you. Good job! You'll become a good doctor or a firefighter or a lawyer. Sounds cool, doesn't it? But what about your inner state, your feelings? If no one sees it in you, then you won't be able to appreciate it in other people. You'll pay attention only to your superiority and a sense of success because your parents loved you only for this. Ultimately, you will also appreciate others for these qualities. If you're as popular and successful, and even more fantastic, narcissists will pay attention to you. Perhaps the mythological parents of the narcissist character admired his beauty so much that they forgot about the moral formation of their son. Any person needs the support of inner emotions and state to prevent forming an emotional void inside. Narcissistic people try to fill it with a sense of admiration and praise, but these things can't replace love. That's why so many narcissists suffer inside. Fortunately, modern advances in psychology can help get rid of narcissism. The doctor tries to guide the patient through the feelings and emotions they experienced in the distant past. They try to find the reasons that made them a narcissist. It's a long and complex therapy, but it is pretty effective. It's difficult to make a person who admires him or herself to go through it. If they agree to the therapy, they admit that something is wrong with them. And such recognition is a challenging test to those who love themselves too much.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear best friend. Happy birthday to you. You're so excited! All your friends and relatives are here. Your adult life has just begun. You've graduated from several colleges, got a driver's license for all kinds of vehicles, and read several thousand books. You're full of energy, and you're only 80 years old. You blow out the candles with this number on your birthday cake. Your parents are here. They're more than 200 years old. Your best friend has recently celebrated 112 years, and your younger brother is only 75. And you all look young for your age. Welcome to the world where the average human lives 400 years. Throughout the centuries, the dark, cold waters of the North Atlantic were hiding the secret of such longevity. The Greenland shark is the longest living vertebrate on Earth. In 2016, marine researchers found out the age of the oldest shark. It was a 400-year-old massive creature. That shark swam in the oceans during the era of pirates. In 2050, scientists found an unusual gene in the shark's DNA. It helped to slow down the aging of the animal. The researchers managed to combine this gene with human DNA, and the life of all people on the planet changed dramatically. 50 years later, at the beginning of the 22nd century, everyone got the opportunity to live for 400 years. The first 80 years of life are considered to be your youth. Mentally, you're developing as quickly as a person from the past. At the age of 80, those people were wise, but already old. In your world, you are as intelligent as an 80-year-old person, but your body, your psyche, and your health are those of a young person. Until you become 20 years old, you grow like a person from the past, but after that, the process slows down by 5 times. During these 80 years, a lot of things happened. You finished school and graduated from college. It took you about 15 years. After that, you received another education and another one. You can get about 10 diplomas in different spheres. Throughout this time, you don't have to work to earn money. Your studies are paid for by the state, and your family gives you enough money to live a happy life. Almost all people on the planet have this opportunity. In the first 80 years, you gain life experience. You find love. Have your heart broken, worry about unimportant things, get into troubles, do rash things, fail, and achieve success. You make new friends. You lose old ones. You make scientific discoveries and learn several languages. When you're 40 years old, you feel like an adult. You no longer want to study. You want to get a good job and live your own life. At the same time, you still look like a teenager. Unfortunately, no company will hire you until you're 100. They believe that you just aren't ready. You're still controlled by your emotions and ego. You need to spend 60 more years getting more life experience. If you don't want to study a lot, you can travel around the world and learn about the cultures of different countries. By the age of 100, you can't help but go through a lot of conflicts and problems. But it helps you overcome vanity, arrogance, greed, selfishness, and other human vices. And only after you do this, you begin to gain real wisdom. You don't forget about keeping your body fit. You can get a black belt in judo, karate, and other martial arts. Or you might become a professional in boxing and figure skating. You train your body and, in this way, prolong your life even more. Now you're 100 years old. Adulthood has begun. You want not only to explore the world, but also to improve it. You've already decided what kind of business you want to get into. It can even be several projects. You might make a breakthrough in genetic engineering, or invent a bracelet that can help you escape gravity so that you can fly. You can explore space and other planets. For the first 100 years of your life, you've realized that the main goal of any person is to work for the benefit of humanity. You make loads of scientific discoveries. Several billion people are doing it together with you. Someone has chosen psychology. Others have picked biology. You've chosen space. In your lifetime, you alone can do more than 5 generations of people did in the past. You earn enough money to lead a comfortable life. You invest in charities and support your family. Also, you pay taxes so that younger generations can explore the world. Every day, scientists, doctors, IT engineers, and astronomers create things that improve people's lives, like an invention that records your dreams and reproduces them as a movie, or a taxi that can take you to Mars, underwater, and aerial cities, and many other things. Almost every person keeps track of the history of their life. It's necessary to remember who they used to be, who they've turned into, and who their ancestors were. You record the knowledge you've got, your achievements and failures. The next generation will also keep a record. Science is developing at an incredible speed. Some kind of time machine has been invented. It can't take you to the past, but it can show you the events you're interested in. People are wise enough to understand that traveling to the past or future can turn into a huge problem. But thanks to this invention, you can see your ancestors who lived in the early 21st, 20th, and even 19th centuries. You realize that your descendants will also be able to see you 1,000 years later. People have always wanted to explore new worlds, so they begin to colonize other planets. Some of them are even beyond our solar system. At first, people used to spend a lot of time and resources looking for a suitable planet. It took a long time to get there. After that, people had to adapt to the conditions on the new planet, and it didn't always end successfully. Some planets were so harsh that people had to leave them. Many spaceships had to surf the expanse of space for years. And then, you, together with a group of other scientists, created a technology that could turn the atmosphere of any planet into the one we have on Earth. A planet where it rains diamonds, a planet with lava flowing on its surface, a planet with icy winds blowing nonstop. All of them could now become habitable. In the past, rich people bought large houses. Now, they can buy a planet. After a person turns 100 years old, they stop celebrating their birthday every year. For such a long life, this holiday becomes too frequent and loses its value. Besides, you have too many friends. If all of them celebrated their birthdays every year, you'd have to buy gifts and go to parties almost every day. So you only have celebrations every 10 or 20 years. Once, you rented an entire planet with zero gravity and celebrated your 250th anniversary for a month. The human race is at its peak. Scientists and doctors are improving the structure of the human genetic code. Now, people can already live for 500 years. And in the future, the average life expectancy will reach the mark of 1,000 years. During their last 100 years of life, people spend their time relaxing, meditating, and thinking about the world. You can continue to work, or you can just live by the sea and watch sunsets every day. You deserve it after having spent the last 200 years of your life on creating an engine for intergalactic travel. When you turn 300 years old, you decide to go on a journey through the universe. You can explore planets thousands of light years away from Earth. Someone might decide to spend the rest of their life with their family. In the past, the human heart used to beat around 3 billion times during an average lifetime. Your heart has already beaten more than 15 billion times. A person from the past used to make more than 200 million steps during their life. That's about 110,000 miles. You've already covered a distance of more than 500,000 miles, which is 1 billion steps. During the 400 years of your life, there have been more discoveries than during the entire history of humankind.
Yep, your brain will grow by roughly 2% if you venture into space. Under normal gravity, it is thought that fluid in the brain naturally moves downwards when we stand upright. But there is evidence that lack of gravity prevents this, which is why fluid accumulates in the brain and skull. While a bunch of flowers may be fragrant for you, there are people with cacosmia who would beg to differ. They perceive all the smells out there as something odorous. Well, that stinks. Speaking of which, out of all the senses we have, smell is the most acute one. We remember 65% of smells after a year, but only 50% of what we've seen over the last 3 weeks. We also get a new nose every 28 days, because the nose cells are renewed every 4 weeks. We don't smell when we sleep. Well, of course, unless you haven't bathed in a while. Your sense of smell goes to sleep when you do, which is why it's almost impossible to notice a gas leak at night. While sleeping, we rely only on sound because the sleep can be disrupted by noise. Almost half of your taste buds will have gone away by the time you turn 60. So maybe you will finally start eating those broccoli. Your sense of smell gets less acute as you get older as well. As for taste again, we mostly rely on our smell since it helps us perceive up to 95% of the flavor. Without the sense of smell, it'd be hard to tell an apple from a turnip. Now, when you cough, you release the air at about 60 miles per hour, so mind the speed limit. Hiccups is a 2-step process. First, you draw in a lot of air because of a muscle spasm, and then bang! The airways are closed, the air is blocked, and the famous sound goes outside. We need ears, not only for hearing but for balance too. Our vestibular system occupies the inner ear. Canals in your inner ear contain fluid and tiny sensors helping you keep the balance. By the way, ears have bones. These are also the only bones that never grow. We can hear thanks to these little guys since they transmit sound vibrations. Doctors call them oscular chain, and it's made up of malleus, incus, and stapes, nicknamed hammer, anvil, and stirrup, which are integral parts of the middle ear. Our ears keep growing throughout our lives. They sweat too, and earwax is actually a kind of sweat they produce. Oh, by the way, the nose never stops growing either, perhaps from all the lies. Your heart is the only muscle that never gets tired. The aorta is massive. Its diameter is almost as large as a hose in your garden. All the bones in our body are connected to each other except for the hyoid, which doesn't articulate with the other bones. This bone serves as support to your tongue, and it's one of the rarest bones to break. If you have red eyes in a photo, blame it on bouncing light. The flash jumps off the capillaries in your retina, creating that effect. As for eyes, the coolest camera so far has 200 megapixels. The human eye has 576. That's why sunsets are so much better in real life than in photos. A roller coaster actually tosses your organs around. When you feel like your stomach's falling down, it's really flipping inside your body. Lips are much more sensitive than fingers, having around 1 million nerve endings. They are 100 times as sensitive as the tips of the fingers. Grooves and furrows make our lip print unique, just like fingerprints are. They also remain unchanged throughout our life. Oh, the tongue print is unique too, by the way. Even though all the people on Earth have an absolutely unique smell, identical twins smell exactly the same. It must be because they have identical genes. Usually, we shed about 50 to 150 hairs a day. An average lifespan for hair is 5 years, and as soon as an old hair says goodbye to your scalp, a new one starts growing immediately. In your body, you carry enough bacteria to fill a can. Bacteria makes about 3 to 5 pounds of your weight, representing 2% of your total weight. Still, most of them are the waste that our body has. A human being has about 20,000 to 25,000 genes. Seems impressive, right? Well, cornflakes have more genes than we do. Luckily, it's about sophistication, not the quantity. Anyway, cornflakes 1, humans 0. We consist of many chemical elements, including iron. The iron in our bodies is enough to produce 3 nails, each 1 inch long. The carbon that we have can be used for 900 pencils. Our feathers can be used to make quill pens. Wait, that's birds. Never mind. Our liver has a superpower of regenerating if part of it was removed. It can grow back to the size that your body needs. Fat helps our bodies consume vitamins. Such vitamins as A, D, K, and E can be properly absorbed only when fat dissolved. Our bodies have enough fat to produce 7 bars of soap. Don't try this at home. When we're awake, our brain may produce enough energy to turn an electric bulb on. It has 10 watts of power. What's that about? Our belly buttons have an entire animal encyclopedia in them, with a range of about 70 different bacteria. Some of them can be also found in the soil of Japan and even in polar ice caps. Our bodies actually glow. Anyway, we can't see that with an unaided eye because the light we emit is 1,000 times less intense than the minimum level we can perceive. Speaking of which, carmine used blushes and lipsticks is red dye made up of ground-up beetles. Oh. Saliva helps to taste food. Our taste buds are ready to perceive it only when it's dissolved by saliva. An eyelash is here to stay for 150 days only. The world eyelash record was about 3 inches long. They're also home for tiny mites. We blink about 4,200,000 times a year, at least once every 8 seconds. Could be cool if we were given a cent every time we blink. We could make more than $100 daily. It may sound crazy, but our bones are stronger than lots of building materials. A cubic inch of human bone can bear about 19,000 pounds, making it 4 times stronger than concrete. The only thing that makes our blood type different is sugar. A, B, and AB types have sugars, while O has none, which makes it perfect for donors. No sugar doesn't make O type less sweet. In fact, it attracts mosquitoes even more than the other blood types. People have only 8 blood types, while cows have 800 and possibly more. Like what? Mu positive and Mu negative? Our fingernails grow way faster than toenails. They grow almost 4 times slower because they have less damage than fingernails. Even though we stumble on them often, sudden circulation bursts usually don't last long. Nails don't only help us catch random tiny objects and peel the stickers off. If you didn't have a rigid structure against which to press, you wouldn't be able to judge how firmly to hold anything. Very few people can actually digest milk. The thing is, there's some special enzyme, let's call it a little helper, that breaks down the sugars any milk has. When people grow up, they run out of this enzyme. This sugar's called lactose, so adults that can't digest it are lactose intolerant. 68% of the world's population can't actually digest milk. If you're sleeping, it doesn't mean your whole body rests. In fact, sometimes your brain has to work even harder when you're asleep. It needs to process tons of information, and reports usually take a lot of time. Humans can't multitask. Really? We need time to switch from one task to another, but if we try to tackle several things at the same time, it's not going to be very productive. Try this one. Lift your right foot and start rotating it in a clockwise direction. Try to write the number 6 with your big toe in the air. Now, check the direction your foot's moving. It's moving in the opposite direction because to write the number 6, you need to make a counterclockwise movement. It actually takes a bit longer to start a new habit. It's not 100% true that 18 or 21 days are enough, as many people think. The process of getting a new habit can take up to 254 days, but on average, it takes around 66 days for a new habit to become automatic.
So, time travel is real. Actually, you're traveling through time right now. With every second of this video, you move 1 second into the future. But there's one person on Earth who has managed to time travel a little further into the future, 0.02 of a second. And that's not the limit. Meet Sergei Krikalev. He's an astronaut who spent 803 days, 9 hours, and 39 minutes on the International Space Station. That's the key to his time travel. The point is that for two objects, one standing still and the other moving, time flow is different. That is, if we take our planet as one object and the ISS as the other, time on Earth and on the ISS will go differently. But this is not enough to significantly affect time. We need to look at gravity. The larger the object, the stronger its gravitational force. For example, on the Moon, you can jump higher and lift heavier objects than on Earth because the Moon is light. But on Jupiter, you can barely stand on your feet because it's heavy and its gravity is many times stronger. Gravity bends space-time itself. Imagine a trampoline or a stretched sheet. As long as there's nothing on it, space-time is even, and time is the same at all points. But put a heavy object there, and you'll see a pit forming in it. Now imagine putting a heavy object like the planet Earth in the center of the sheet. It weighs 6 tons, plus another 21 zeros. It would bend our sheet so much that time would go differently in the center than in a place where space-time is flat. And the heavier the object, the greater the warp, and the slower time will go there. For example, near the Sun, time goes even slower than on our planet because it's more than 300,000 times heavier. Or take a black hole. Even a small one weighs tens or hundreds of times more than the Sun. And supermassive ones are millions and billions of times heavier. They will bend space-time so much that time near them practically stops. So, our hero, Sergei Krikalev, used this very method of time travel. He just wasn't at the very depth of this time-space vortex, but on the ISS. It's at a point in space-time where the curvature of the sheet isn't that strong. And time went a little faster for him than it does here. Just a little bit. And if you spend enough time there, gradually, you start to overtake the people here on Earth in time. Sergei could have gone much farther in time, but another law of physics prevented him from doing so. It's all about the unity of space and time. If you're standing, you're only moving in time. But if you run forward, you move both in time and space. The faster you run through space, the slower you move in time.
The International Space Station travels around our planet at 4.7 miles per second. This speed slowed down Sergei's movement through time. So in more than 2 years on the ISS, he only traveled in time by 2/100ths of a second. So here's a way that you can time travel. Seat your friend at a table and give them one watch. Put the other one on your arm and start running around the table. If you run fast and long enough, you'll notice how the time on your watch and your friend's is different. Voila! You have traveled through time. But there are other ways to get to the future. For the first way, you need to get to a black hole. The closest one is just over 1,000 light years away from our solar system. You jump into your faster-than-light spaceship and arrive there. You need to fly as close as possible to its center, to the very edge of the event horizon. Space-time is so warped here that 1 second can be equal to weeks or even months on Earth. So just wait here for a few minutes. Now, turn the hyperdrives back on and fly away. Of course, you have to be careful here. Black holes are so heavy that nothing can escape their gravitational force. Even light, which is the fastest thing in the universe, can't escape a black hole's embrace. But that's no problem for you, and you're already on your home planet. Wow, it's been decades on Earth while you've been away. There are flying cars, robots, and holograms everywhere. Another option is traveling at the speed of light. You and your friend are standing on the starting line at the stadium, and each of you has a stopwatch. Press start, you run at the speed of light around the Earth a few times and finish. Stop the clock. The time with which you ran your sprint is less than that of your friend who is standing still. But there's a so-called twin paradox that scientists are still racking their brains over. It's all about what to take as a reference point. If the center of the coordinate system is a person standing still, and the other is running at the speed of light, then the runner's clock will lag after the run, because they were moving not only in time, but also in space, remember? But if you take the runner as the reference point, it was the static person who was in motion relative to them. And then the static person's clock would have to be behind. So as a result of the experiment, both guys' clocks, the runner and the static guy, would show the same time. This is the twin paradox. Another way to cheat the laws of physics and stop the flow of time is to get into the plank position. Then time just stops for you. Okay, just kidding. Assuming that traveling back in time is possible, there's a whole bunch of problems and paradoxes. For example, at 12 p.m., you're engaged in building a time machine. At 12:30, you finish building it. And then, at 1 p.m., you enter it for one purpose: to prevent you from building the time machine yourself. Then you go back in time at 12:20, when the time machine is almost finished, and break one of its details so that it can't be built to start with. But if your younger version couldn't build a time machine, then there's no way that you could get to the past either, right? Or what if you did build a time machine and went back in time to your father when he was on a date with your mom? You ruin their date and they break up. In this case, your birth would have been impossible. But if you hadn't been born, you would never have built a time machine and gone back in time to ruin your daddy's date. And then, nothing would have interfered with your birth. Wow, things are getting a little too complicated. Okay, there are simpler ways to travel through time. For example, biological ones. I'm talking about freezing. If you freeze your body, you will move through time with the rest of the world, but you'll be asleep the whole time. And when you wake up, you'll be in the future. By the way, animals that hibernate in winter, like bears, are time travelers. They simply skip the hungry winter seasons. But there's one problem with that. When we freeze, the water in our cells and tissues turns to ice, and as a consequence, they feel dehydrated, like in a desert. This can be avoided by using protective chemicals. But the hardest part is the awakening. Our scientists can't safely unfreeze a living organism. So, for now, freezing your body is a one-way ticket. But we have hope that scientists of the future will find a way to avoid damaging cells and tissues. Then, they'll open refrigerators with people and wake up a whole bunch of time travelers. And that's a pretty expensive adventure. Freezing an entire body can cost $200,000 or more. But many people believe that time travel is already real, and some time travelers have been caught in photographs or camera footage. For example, this photo from 1941. There are men in suits and women in elegant hats, and among them, this guy in futuristic glasses and hoodie. Or this video, where you can see a woman in the background, talking on her cell phone. Wow, that was about a century ago, and back then, no one could imagine what a cell phone was. Well, these facts can be easily explained. The man in the photo is wearing glasses that were made back in 1920, and the t-shirt and hoodie also already existed at that time. And the woman talking on the cell phone is actually holding an acousticon in her hand. It's kind of a hearing aid, one of the first of its kind. So we can say one thing for sure: time travel remains just a dream for all people. Except Sergei Krikalev, who was able to trick the laws of physics and be 0.02 of a second ahead of all the people on Earth.